All right, let's jump into it again here. A random kind of Tuesday afternoon edition of the Tall Can Audio Podcast. Matt Robinson with you as always. Thanks for joining me here on this one. And man, it's only Tuesday afternoon, and it already feels like it's been quite a week as we move through what has been kind of a shitstorm around the Leafs here over the last, I was going to say 24, 36 hours, but maybe it's the last 2 weeks. Maybe it's the last 2 months. Maybe it's the last 49 years. However you want to calculate that for yourself. We're on social media at Tall Can Audio. Would love to hear what you guys think about all this stuff. And subscribe to the pod wherever you're hearing us right now. We're not going to spend any kind of time on the beer, although we are going to have one. It's the usual Octopus Wants to Fight from Great Lakes Brewing Company. When it's just me, that's often what I go with. Love this one. We'll talk a little bit about how much Steve Simmons wants to fight in a few minutes. This new report from Chris Johnston about Austin Matthews putting the Leafs on the clock. Some of the reactions to that. Pierre Dorion is in the news for all the funniest ways possible, funniest reasons possible. There's lots of things going on here. Normally I come in here with a bit of an outline. Today I've come in here with just some stuff on my mind, and I will look ahead in case you're not feeling another Toronto-centric stream of consciousness, and mention that from Sportsnet and from the Blue Jays Happy Hour podcast, the Maple Leaf Hot Stove podcast, Nick Ashbourne will be here on Wednesday afternoon. Like I said, look for that one in the afternoon instead of the normal morning drop. This is the way the schedule is playing out this week. We'll get that out to you as soon as it's ready. And I promise on that one, I will talk to him about the Blue Jays first, because I know some of you have probably heard enough about the Leafs drama. I know some of you are wallowing in it. Some of you are loving it, the dysfunction. But if you're more kind of sick of all the Leaf talk, which frankly you've been spared here over the last several weeks, several months, they've been largely irrelevant, and so I've largely ignored them. But they're hard to ignore right now. We will talk to Nick about that on the Wednesday afternoon edition of the show, but we'll put it second, and we will dig into his Blue Jays expertise first so that everybody can enjoy. And then if you're not feeling any more hockey talk, you can bail out at that point. But Nick is well-versed in both, and so we will take advantage of that when he's here, like I said, on the Wednesday edition of the podcast. Subscribe for that if you're not already. And then on Thursday, scheduling quirks, all that. This will drop for you on Friday morning. It'll be Thursday afternoon, I think, by the time I talk to him. But Steve Bunda will be on the show. I want to talk to him about some of the CFL stuff. Nobody knows the CFL in this market quite like Bunda. Pretty plugged in. Pretty big news around the CFL. And no doubt we'll have some NHL playoff talk with him as well. Maybe some baseball talk, maybe some UFC talk. But the big thing I want to pick his brain on is some of these changes around the CFL. So that's what's coming up for the rest of this week. So stay tuned for all of that. Man, let's start with the good stuff. And if you're from Vancouver, you probably don't see it as all that good. That would be reasonable. But Pierre Dorion is in the news, and this is all kind of playing out in real time here on Tuesday afternoon. Look, word broke yesterday that Pierre Dorion had interviewed for the Vancouver Canucks GM job. And then on Tuesday, it started to kind of make its way around that he might be one of the favorites. And some of the insiders actually had him as the favorite, the process approaching being finished, and he was going to be the guy. And then all of a sudden, it kind of blew up. Canucks fans, perhaps reasonably so, not thrilled with that as the potential hire after the job that he did in Ottawa. Started phoning Rogers Arena, started phoning local media. There was one radio program and YouTube, I believe, as well. I may be mixing that up. I know the guy's name. Obviously, it's Rick Dollywall. He's very connected. I'm just not sure exactly what platform he's on at this point. I'm not totally plugged into the Vancouver market, obviously. He stepped out of the room after, essentially saying he'd heard all the same things that everyone else had heard, that Pierre Dorion was going to be the guy. And he stepped out of the room during his broadcast and then came back saying, yeah, it's apparently not being received well around management, that this news is out there and that fans aren't happy and that people are scared and that they're being ridiculed a little bit. So whether or not it gets derailed, I'm not sure. But this is the correct reaction to a Pierre Dorion hire, I would think, in the year 2026 in the NHL. Look, if you're here in the nation's capital, you saw the job that he did for the Ottawa Senators. I don't know that we'll ever be able to completely untangle how much of it was him doing a poor job and how much of it was him having to answer to an unstable, let's put it kindly, owner. That's going to be difficult, right, for us to ever totally understand how much was him and how much of it was the circumstance that he was in. But he didn't do a great job. Even in the moments where things look good, right? And Graham Nichols wrote a great piece on this that he put back out on Twitter. I'll link to it in the show notes, about the good and the bad of the Pierre Dorion era and how many, they actually got during his tenure an awful lot of games out of their draft picks. But is that the measurement that you want to use? And these are not my original thoughts. I'm sort of doing a poor job or zooming out here and kind of summarizing the Nichols piece. And like I said, I would highly recommend you check that out for yourself. And he's sort of leaving it up to you. But, okay, you got a lot of games, but out of not great players, right? Like a lot of guys who end up on the third pair or a lot of third. Now, drafting is not an easy science. And so the fact that you have a pile of picks who end up playing for you or playing around the league, that is good. Is the fact that they never turned into really good players, is that an indication of the fact that maybe you chose the wrong guys? Is that an indicator that perhaps your development staff wasn't great? These are reasonable questions to be asked. There is some high end in their draft history. Obviously, you can look at the Stutzlas and the Sandersons, certainly the Brady Tkachuk's, right? And go, there is some high-end talent there as well. And not all of those are slam dunks, right? There was a reasonable debate to be had when the Sens took Jake Sanderson at number 5 in the 2020 draft, 2021 draft, 2020 draft, I believe. He wasn't even universally agreed upon to be the best defenseman in the draft or available at that spot. A lot of people had Jamie Drysdale ahead of Jake Sanderson. And that sounds silly when you look back in 2026 and go, Jake Sanderson is clearly better than Jamie Drysdale, but that wasn't evident at the time, right? The draft is always a bit of a crapshoot, and they got that one right. They got it right with Tim Stutzla when they picked him. Brady Tkachuk was another one. I was baffled by the Brady Tkachuk pick based on the year he was coming off of, and Philip Zadina was right there. Man, the Ottawa Senators are in a very different place right now if they'd taken Philip Zadina over Brady Tkachuk. So there are good and bad in any, when you look at any executive's draft history. The trades and the PR are probably where it's a tougher look when you're trying to study Pierre Dorion's history with the Ottawa Senators. Look, he had to oversee, and again, I guess it's tied to ownership, right? But he had to oversee the departure of Erik Karlsson, the departure of Mark Stone. And when I mentioned the PR of it all, you can't describe one of those days as your proudest day as the general man. Fans don't want to hear that. And even if you think you hit a home run with that trade, which we can debate, fans don't want to hear it. That's not what you say about one of those days. And there was an awful lot of those moments. A lot of, we're a team, right? These bad quotes that just make you feel like a bumbling fool is running your team. And I don't think Pierre Dorion is a bumbling fool. I don't think he was particularly good at his job. But I don't think he's an idiot. But he was not good with the media, and he was always having to protect his owner, right? And sort of deflect attention away from the fact that he was probably doing someone else's bidding. But you look at some of the other things that they did that blew up in their faces and didn't work. You know, you look at Alex DeBrincat. You look at Matt Murray. Luckily, they were able to pass that mistake off to some other fools down the road. He's not the guy that the Vancouver Canucks fans, after, some really questionable management teams over the last little bit. There's no way that was... And it's similar to what I've been ranting and raving here about Toronto. That, I would rather have taken a shot at Mike Gillis, where there's some reputation of success there. Whether he's the right choice or not, okay, you can talk me into it. Whether it be Sonny Meta out of Florida or Scott White out of Dallas, you're like, okay, those guys have been under the learning tree in elite franchises across the league. And Toronto's like, nope, John Chayka. And Vancouver is apparently ready to be like, nope, Pierre Dorion. Well, what you doing? Why is that? Man, if you thought that that Monday press conference in Toronto was fiery and was interesting, Vancouver media knows how to get in the mud. And if they do end up going with Pierre Dorion, that press conference may dwarf Toronto's in terms of how uncomfortable and how awkward it was. I just don't think he's the guy. And I think when you're trying to sell Canucks fans on a brighter future, look, it's not just that the Canucks have been bad, it's that the Canucks have been in the news as an embarrassment, right? The infighting and that, everything that's gone on out there. We need to settle things down. And if you're here in the nation's capital, does Pierre Dorion feel like the guy to do that for them? The biggest thing that every reporter you talk to, people have said it on the air, in papers, people I've spoken to, it's private, it's public. It's the biggest thing that the core group of Ottawa Senators said to Michael Andlauer when he bought the team is quiet the noise. We're fine here. We like the market. We like the guys. We believe there's a good group here. Please get the noise out of here. There's a different gong show every month or two. That has to go away. Well, that's already the case in Vancouver. And you're going to bring in Pierre Dorion, the guy who oversaw the bi-monthly gong show in the nation's capital, to settle it down? Yeah, I can see why Canucks fans are going, yeah, that ain't our guy, man. Keep looking. And I wonder, it'll be hard to know for certain, but this all happened pretty fast, right? His name kind of got leaked on Monday that he was in the mix. And then on Tuesday, a bunch of people, a lot of them pretty reputable, both in the market and kind of more national insiders, said, yeah, I think he might be the front runner. And then all of a sudden it was, yeah, there's serious backlash, and ownership and management and whatever else are hearing hey, no, don't go there. Don't do it. And so we'll see whether or not that type of backlash can derail a process. And I guess we'll never know for sure whether they were definitely getting ready to lock him in or whether that was sort of overstated. But, it is an interesting wrinkle to think that just the mere leak of his name, the mere rumblings that it might be Pierre Dorion, were enough to get the local media, the local fan base, the season ticket holders to go, nope, no, fuck that. And see if they can get the team to do a bit of an about face on that. I will get to the Steve Simmons thing here in a minute, because it's been, I'll be real with you, it's been overplayed. I shouldn't even say overplayed. It was a notable exchange at that Toronto Maple Leaf press conference on Monday, but everyone has had their say on it, and I'm going to as well. But I'm going to put it off until the end, again, in case you've heard enough and don't wish to get into it again. And I want to deal with it here today because this has really become a bit of a thing. Tomorrow we're going to have Nick Ashbourne on the podcast, And he occasionally writes for Sportsnet, obviously a Rogers-owned property. And we're hearing an awful lot of shit here over the last 24, 48 hours, and it's suddenly gaining steam. Everyone feels like they've got a take on this, and you're welcome to a take on this. Whether it's a reasonable take is, I suppose, in the eye of the beholder. I don't want to put Nick in a place as a guy who does sometimes make part of his living writing for Rogers about the Blue Jays, where he does a very nice job. But Rogers appears to be closing ranks here a little bit. And everyone has their own opinion on that, but I don't really understand why anyone would be surprised by that, right? We have seen that Rogers, like this has been known for at least a year, 18 months. Rogers is buying out Bell's portion of MLSE. I'm not sure that deal is closed yet, but it is closing soon. And so Rogers will be the sole owner of MLSE for the moment. I guess when I say sole owner, that's not totally correct. For the moment, it will still include Larry Tannenbaum, but they are getting ready to remove him as well and take on full ownership of the thing. Point being, Bell is no longer a factor, which means TSN really no longer needs to be a factor. And so as this is all getting ready to happen and the new management group is being like, this is the first big news, big scoop. It's only coming from Elliott, who's obviously on the Rogers side of things. To his credit, because I have not always been kind to him on this show, some of it's coming from Nick Kyprios, also on the Rogers side of things. And a lot of the TSN guys aren't getting that same insider access that they used to have. And there's a number of ways to read that, I guess. Like on Monday, when all of this was finished, there was no interview. Like it used to be clockwork in Toronto. If Brad Treliving was going to be on the Nick Kyprios show on Sportsnet Radio on Tuesday afternoon, he would also be on Overdrive sometime on Tuesday afternoon. It was sort of a both companies own the team or own MLSE. And so on these days, the guy does the tour, not just one station. He's got to do both. So, once every 2 months, once every quarter, once every half season, whatever it might be, when we're going to trot out Craig Berube or Brad Treliving, you would see him appear on both platforms. That didn't happen on Monday. I wasn't particularly surprised by it, and it doesn't mean they will never appear on TSN radio, but Rogers is now in a place where they can prioritize their own platforms and say that on day one, at least, you'll only talk to Elliott on 32 Thoughts. You'll only be on Kyprios' show and not on Overdrive. You'll only be on Sportsnet Central and not on TSN Sports Center. Like, you can flex a little bit here. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying it shouldn't be surprising. And we have suddenly seen people drawing these lines, and I get it, because we just did this in Ottawa, where a lot of our listeners are based. The Allmark of it all, the Brady Tkachuk of it all, people got tight. Like, the playoffs are coming. I don't want to think about Brady, being involved in something stupid on his podcast. I don't want to hear about Linus Allmark and his mental health break. And if you, as a reporter, do your job and bring those things up, I will roast you for it. Not me specifically. I'm now faceless internet guy. If you're bringing up anything negative about my team, it's because you're out to get my team. That's not how this works. I have a long and complicated relationship with the idea of sports journalism. Look, you're a sports fan. That's why you're here. I'm a sports fan. That's why I do this show. It's kind of silly. There are far more important things in the world. And in my opinion, real quote unquote journalists are covering those things. You and I, for better or worse, are watching Entertainment Tonight. And the people who cover that, what you wore on the red carpet last night, who's dating who's going to star in the next movie. I look at that and I go, fuck, that's silly. But there are people out there who cover that and they consider themselves entertainment journalists. Some of them are very good and some of them are very reputable and some of them are absolutely awful. And that's exactly what you and I do with sports. Now, no, I don't particularly care who Austin Matthews might be dating or, why so-and-so stepped away from the team right now. I just need to know that they're unavailable, these sorts of things. But the people who cover it consider themselves journalists, and some of them are, and some of them do a very credible job, and some of them are awful. Just like in the entertainment business, just like in the music business, it just works that way. And we just went through this in Ottawa. How many people roasted Claire Hanna for asking Brady Tkachuk about things he voluntarily went in for on his own podcast? He created that mess. She gets to ask him about it. That's the way it works. And so we're starting to see this now in Toronto. Everyone's saying, well, all of the noise, all of the criticism seems to only be coming from TSN and from the Toronto Sun and the Toronto Star and the Athletic. And I put it out on my Twitter, and it was a stupid idea. When you interact with stupid people, you get stupid replies. Another way of saying that is that everyone who works for Rogers, who owns the team, who controls their paychecks, thinks this is a good idea. Are you comfortable with that framing of it? Are you comfortable with that only Rogers employed journalists think Rogers made a smart hire here? Or does that set off alarm bells to you? I'm not certain why you can stand there and go, everyone not employed by the people who just made this hire are all just pissy and think it's a bad idea, and all the real journalists must work for Rogers Sportsnet. I think that's a serious, serious lack of media literacy. And I'm not sitting here telling you that all the people who work for Sportsnet aren't any good at this. We've dealt with this for a really long time across the Blue Jays spectrum. There are a pile of people who write and report and do radio and do television and do podcasts under the Rogers umbrella on the Toronto Blue Jays. And some of them do it quite credibly. Others do not. So this isn't a broad strokes type of thing, or at least it shouldn't be. But you're seeing that pop up in Toronto now. And it's because we're fans. I want to believe, and I am now me, alongside faceless idiot on the internet, which is really, all I am. I want this to go well. I have serious concerns that it's not going to. I'd love to know how we got here. But I want to be wrong. I want this to work. I want it to go real. And so you start to grasp at straws and you start to go, everyone who thinks this is a mistake, everyone who thinks that this wasn't the right hire, everyone who's pointing out anything that might be problematic here, they're all haters, and it's only because they're pissed that Rogers isn't giving them access. Meanwhile, we're ignoring the fact that only the Rogers-employed reporters are saying it's all fine. You got to be smarter than that. You got to be able to untangle that, because this is increasingly becoming the world we live in places far more important than sports. Like, why is it that everyone else says it's bad, but the Rogers guys say it's good, so it's good? No. Some of the Rogers guys are right, and some of them are wrong. Some of the other guys are right, some of them are wrong. But we're seeing reputable people suddenly get ripped. Like, when did we decide Chris Johnston was bad at this and just had an axe to grind? I don't know why that's suddenly a thing. But he put out a piece on Tuesday morning saying that the Toronto Maple Leafs are on the clock with their captain. And we've already sort of known that. Now, he may have painted it as a little bit more urgent, but I don't believe he just made that up out of nowhere in response to the press conference on Monday or the hiring of Chayka and Sundin. I believe he may have more recently made contact with his sources, whether that be Matthews or, his representatives or his family. But I can't imagine he just made it up out of nowhere, out of spite, which is suddenly the way half of the fan base, more than half of the fan base, is reacting online. It's, you're telling me things I don't really want to hear, so you must have an agenda and fuck you. And I know you know this. Whatever side of the political spectrum you land on outside of sports, that's what's happening in news. That's what's happening in a lot of places. Reject anything that you don't like, paint it as biased in some way, and walk away. It's not good. On the Matthews thing, I don't imagine much has changed. I am certain he would have raised an eyebrow on his ample forehead at the hiring that just happened. And it puts them in an interesting place. The way I would have read CJ's article, if I, wasn't trying to decide which of the major telecoms in this country I want to side with, because some of them are not the telecoms, they both suck. But some of the reporters are really good, and some of them are not. And but that applies across the red and the blue brands. But I read that as fire Craig Berube. And I don't think that's good either. I said this earlier on the show, that it sure looked like this team quit on this coach at some point. I also think towards the end of the season, this coach had clearly quit on this team. And you're starting to hear rumblings now that they want to bring Berube back. And I think that's what this Austin Matthews quote is about. I'm not sure I'll be back in the fall. Call me when you've decided about your coach. That second part is me projecting just a little. You turned the greatest goal scorer in the league at the time, and he wears some of this himself, obviously. But you turned him into prime John Madden. The hockey player, right? Not the football commentator, who I also loved. Let's play some football. You turned him into all defensive zone starts and the shot blocking leader amongst, what do we... Austin Matthews has not been good enough, but a serious part of that is the way he's been used. And I don't think he has any interest in playing another year with Craig Berube. And so my read on this new article from CJ is that, yeah, I need to see what you're going to do through the offseason. That's going to include some roster stuff, obviously, any kind of trades or free agency signings, anything like that. But who's your fucking coach? Because I'm not doing another year with it. And again, I'm not defending Austin Matthews on that. I'm not defending him or Willie on the fact that they clearly checked out on this guy or the rest of the roster having checked out on this guy. But how many times did I come in here and talk about that guy in his post-game press conferences checking out on them? I don't know, they don't have brains and hearts, as he's gesturing wildly, pointing at locker room. I don't know, go ask them. Okay, you're a loser. Head coach is supposed to be the ultimate leader of the locker room, and you are offloading all responsibility. Yeah. He can absolutely go behind closed doors and yell and scream that shit at them. When you come out and talk like that in the media, fuck you, you're done. 20 guys say, yeah, you're not one of us, you're out, see ya. So that's the way I read. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Berube gets fired. I think one of the things that may have happened here with the hiring of John Chayka off the scrap heap is that he would have had very little leverage. Keith Pelly can keep his fingers in the pie here without, a strong personality like a Mike Gillis saying, no, this is my show. I'll let you know when I need your input on something, like a serious infusion of cash or something like that. John Chayka hasn't got the heft to say that to Keith Pelly, and I think that's why he got hired. So has he already been told, yeah, I like this coach, and he's owed a lot of money over the next 2 seasons, so you're not firing him? Similar to, we don't want to rebuild, we want to contend. I think there's a serious chance John Shake has already been given his marching orders, and it may cost them Austin Matthews. I could be wrong. I do think there's a serious chance the Leafs are in jeopardy of losing Austin Matthews at the end of this contract, or maybe sooner. Maybe it plays out like the Quinn Hughes thing, middle of next season, if things aren't going well again. And I've seen the theory floated that a lot of teams use when they hire a new GM. Don't fire him right away. Wait for a moment where things are going poorly, and then you have a bullet to fire to bring in your own guy. The problem is the Leafs are not going to be good enough next year to absorb that. If you want to make the playoffs again, look, the Leafs are not going back next fall to being a division winner. That doesn't mean they can't win enough to make the playoffs. Doesn't mean they can't be competitive. But there's not going to be much room for error. And so if you keep Craig Berube so that you have a bullet to fire in October or November, not October, God, what a bad October that would have to be. It's not off the table. In November or December, you need to make a move and, well, we can fire our coach. All right. You've probably lost too many games, though, and you're already out of it. Like, this team is not going to be good enough to make up the ground that you've already lost while you were proving a point on this coach. The other thing you will have lost, and I don't know how interested he's going to be, but Bruce Cassidy is available now. He's probably not going to be in November. Pete DeBoer, for whatever you think of him, was also available earlier this spring. He passed on that. I wouldn't fuck around. And look, if John Shake is supposed to be this analytics guy, he's going to have already seen, allowing numerous high danger scoring chances off the rush and in front of the net and off not being able to clear the zone against 2 often injured goaltenders wasn't really a recipe for success. He already knows that. And that this isn't the guy, this isn't the coach. And that's on top of whether or not your top guys will stay and play for him or not. So he already knows keeping Craig Berube is not the right play. So the first litmus test of this management group will be, does he keep him anyway? Which means he came in and ownership had already said, yeah, you're not firing him. And if we learn that, then nothing else matters. This all falls apart and it crashes and burns with ownership's fingers in the pie, like I said. Like, to me, this decision on this coach is the litmus test. Is this GM smart enough to know that this isn't the right guy for your group? Or does he do ownership's bidding and say, yeah, okay, we'll keep him on? But to me, that more than anything else is what Austin Matthews, that piece from CJ on Tuesday was all about. It'll be certainly a little bit about the roster and what things change. But nothing has changed since the last time he said that, right? That I need to see what the offseason looks like and all that kind of stuff. There was no reason to have a new article, a new statement on it, outside of the fact that now we've hired a new management group and they have at least indicated an openness to keep the coach. To me, this was Matthews saying, I wouldn't. And if you're keeping him, it might cost you me. And like I said, it didn't look good on Willie or Matthews or the rest of the guys who quit on the coach. Like, that's not a great indicator of their character or whatever else to just, be willing to quit like that. But I'll take them over him any day of the week and see if somebody else can get them fired up again. Whether it's Bruce Cassidy, whether he'd have any interest in Toronto at all, I have no idea. But I know he's not waiting around till the fall, till you're already behind the 8 ball, and, it's now or never. So like I said, I wanted to sort of have some of that conversation and the next one here without putting that on Nick's plate tomorrow. Some of that he may want no part of. The Jays are a different beast. That's what he covers. Why would he want to muddy his hands in the rest of this mess? Because clearly MLSE is following a lot of people right now. squeezing on a lot of people right now and putting pressure on a lot of people right now. And like I said, we don't need to do that to Nick. So you've sort of heard my thoughts. It's getting a little hairy. They're clamping down and prefer positive in-house coverage only. And haven't we all seen that coming for a while with the way a lot of these organizations across major sporting leagues has started to go? Last thing here then, Steve Simmons and the press conference. And we'll get to Simmons' comments on his own. I wanted to zoom out on the press conference just for a second because it kind of stunk. I thought the Toronto media, to a certain extent, and not everybody, but dropped the ball here a little bit. I certainly understand the focus on, hey, how do we land on black sheep John Chayka and inexperienced Matt Sundin as the guys? It's a reasonable question. It became evident very early on they weren't going to answer it. But it was reasonable enough to ask. But I would have loved to have seen a lot more attention paid to, okay, that's done. They're here. These are the guys. What's next? Like, it took 10 questions to get to Austin Matthews. It took 20 questions to get to Craig Berube. Those are linchpin move forward decisions, and we're just not talking about it. We're talking about, was Ty Domi involved? You know, we're talking about, and it's more of Keith Pelly defending himself from completely legitimate reporting that we've seen here over the last couple of days. You know, we've got the Steve Simmons question, which we'll get to, like I said, in a moment. We've got Gino Reda asking completely legitimate questions. Like, these are all real questions. Saying, hey, you know, you haven't worked in the league in 6 years. Is there not some concern that your knowledge, there's going to be a gap in the knowledge here, right? In terms of who's available and who's in the league. Like, I think all that's fair, but once it became clear they were just not going to engage, the motivation or the approach needs to be, okay, cut Keith Pelly out of this and just direct your questions to John Chayka and Matt Sundin. What went wrong? What do you think the proper approach to building a team is right now? How are you going to do that with limited assets? Is it best to concede that the window is closing and trade Willie and Matthews and start to build up from here? What's it going to take to convince Willie and Matthews that they should stay? Like, forward-facing questions. And again, I don't really have a beef with the back-facing questions on how we got here, but you got to read the room. And Keith Pelly has just decided, fuck you, I'm not answering your questions. There was a moment when Gino Reda, and look, maybe it doesn't matter. I'm not the biggest fan of Gino Reda, but he stepped up and he asked the question, you know, about the knowledge gap in the 6 years even out. It's a totally fair question. And before he's even done answering it, when you're watching on the video feed, Keith Pelly isn't going to let John Chayka answer that question. He's got his hand up in front in that like stop gesture, and he's gesturing to Chayka, I'll take this question. I'll handle it. Hey, did you just hire this guy to run the most wealthy hockey team in North America? Well, then let him answer his own fucking questions. Get out of here, Dad. And so Gino Reda circles back on it and and the microphone's been taken away. I don't think that was malicious. I think, like, I want to be fair here. I think they assumed Gino had asked his question and they could take the microphone to the next person. But they didn't actually answer his question, so he circled back and tried to reiterate. And again, they gave nothing. Like, he goes, still not a concern for me, Gino. He knows the players in the league, Gino. Well, why are you answering that question, first of all? Maybe John would have answered it differently. And like, if I'm being fair about this press conference, and it doesn't mean that this is all going to go well, but both John Chayka and Matt Sundin were reasonably well spoken in the press conference. I had more confidence in listening to them than I did to Keith Pelly, and yet Pelly badly needed to keep inserting himself. But when those two were allowed to speak, and then there was some separate interviews and scrums afterwards, and Like I said, they both took turns on the Kiprio show and on Friedman's 32 Thoughts show. And both Chayka and Sundin came off reasonably well then as well. Now, look, again, I'm not saying that means this is all fine and that, it's onwards and upwards from here. I'm saying that when Keith Pelly shuts his mouth, and I put this right on Twitter, I said, if Keith Pelly is smart based on his last couple of press conferences, he will introduce his hires and get out of the way. But that I'm not optimistic. And I was correct to not be optimistic because he couldn't stop talking. But once the greater presser was over and these other interviews and scrums started to play out, you could start to go, all right, I'm willing to give these guys a chance. Like, I'm still highly skeptical that these are the right guys, but they're well-spoken. They seem to know what needs to be done. Whether they can pull it off, we'll have to wait and see. But I don't want to see Keith Pelly ever up there putting his hand up in front of the guy he just hired and go, no, I'll handle it. It's not a concern. He knows, Gino. Then why can't he answer for himself? It was really shit. So all of this gets us to the Steve Simmons of it all, who I perhaps went a little over the top in my support of on Monday. Because we're going to play the clip here in a second. And it's an asshole question, at least in its framing. It's actually a perfectly legitimate question. Its framing is entirely asshole-ish. But Keith Pelly has given no indication that he deserves anything less. The way he has spoken to media over the last several months, the way he has spoken to the fans over the last several months, even this press conference itself was held at Real Sports instead of at the ACC so that he could fill one area of it with MLSE employees so that they'll clap at the right time and create this fun vibe, I guess, which didn't really pan out. But Steve Simmons asked this. I'm going to play the whole thing. There's a question. It's a shitty question in its wording. There's a shitty answer. Then there's a follow-up and another answer.
You talk about the due diligence that you did on John prior to hiring him and now hiring him. In the past, say, 3 to 4 days, I have been in contact with about 20 people who work in the National Hockey League, many of whom are prominent names that we would all know. And of the 20 people I spoke to, one was supportive of John's hiring, and the other 19 thought it was a sham, to be perfectly honest. Words were used like con artist, liar, salesman. How did you come to a different conclusion that I was able to come to in a very short time?
I must have talked to different people.
That's it? Because I'm telling you, the hockey world today is astounded by this announcement.
Okay.
And your response to that?
Is we've conducted due diligence, and it was deep due diligence. It was a thorough process, and I'm quite happy with where we've landed.
So look, the spirit of Steve Simmons' question deserved to be asked. Because based on everyone that I read, everything else out there that I know, just from what happened in Arizona, that was well publicized. His attempts to depart for New Jersey, the costing them of draft picks, all these sorts of things did not leave John Chayka with a good reputation. That's why he's been out of the league for 5 or 6 years. I have no doubt Steve Simmons found 19 of 20 people to go, what the fuck are they doing? But it is harsh to right in front of the guy say words like con artist and liar, and he called him a salesman, which on its own I don't think is a bad thing. I assume he meant like snake oil salesman or something like that. But to call somebody a salesman, settle down, man. There's nothing wrong with that. And so Pelly, I get it. When someone comes at you like that, clearly aggressive, clearly rude, clearly, I was going to say clearly unprofessional. Not everybody found it unprofessional, but many did. You get to go, well, I guess I spoke to different people. Like, you're not going to get a great answer out of somebody when you ask a question that way. So Steve Simmons doesn't back down. He goes, that's it. And he waits for Pelly to come. But Pelly does nothing in that moment to defend his guy and say, we believe he's learned his lesson, or we believe he learned some things down in Arizona, and he just defends himself and his own due diligence. Like, I have no idea who the hell Keith Pelly spoke to that landed him back at John Chayka. But he didn't even stand up for his guy. He just defended himself in his own process, which is what he does. I brought this up after the last press conference when they had gotten rid of Brad Treliving and said that literally his first order of business was to defend himself. And he did that a couple times in this press conference. He's answering a different question. He goes, and other people were saying I was using ChatGPT or AI and the whatever, and it was all erroneous. It wasn't. Enough people have reported this now. We know. We don't know to what extent you were using it, but you were using it. And he takes these opportunities to not defend his people, to not defend the organization, to not answer a question, but to defend his own reputation. And it's just gross. But so was Steve Simmons' question, I guess. I'm glad the question was asked. It could have absolutely been framed better. I've been doing this job a long time, and I spoke to a number of my contacts throughout the league, and all of them are baffled, and all of them are astounded by this hire. Can you explain to me why you landed here on someone who, has this much baggage and is now fit to lead the Toronto Maple Leafs? Like, it gets across the exact same thing. So there was a certain element of Steve Simmons wanting to make himself the star, which is not out of the ordinary for him. He's not a particularly reputable guy to begin with. He just tried to give Roberto Alomar a platform to defend himself not too long ago, which was gross in and of itself. Like, he's a bit of a... But there was a moment there where I went, yeah, get him, Steve. And I put that right on our Twitter at Tall Can Audio. And I don't love it in the past, but I left it up there because it's real, and that's how I felt in that moment. So if I'm going to get buried for it or whatever else, it's fair. But that's how I felt. And it wasn't because I'm suddenly some big Steve Simmons booster, but I felt that's what Keith Pelly and his condescension had coming in that moment. Now, one of the things that makes me backpedal a little, and I'd be curious to get your take on this, is that John Chayka's kids were in the room to watch Dad get called a salesman, but a liar or a fraud. And that sucks. And so I don't know in that moment who's out of line. Like, should MLSE have been self-aware enough to go, hey, we're seeing some things online. People aren't reacting well to this hiring. You may not want to have your family here. Because even if Steve Simmons asks his question in that more professional way that I just outlined, it's still not going to feel good for the kids to watch Dad be accused of these things. To be told no one around the league respects dear old Dad. Or is it... It sure sounds like they were expecting more of a celebration. That was the vibe they were trying to paint. Like I said, having the other staff there to clap, having Gilmore and Clark and Tucker all there. Like, they're trying to create this as this next great chapter, and it's going to be fun. But these people, they employ enough social media, admins to know when things aren't being received well. Like, maybe the advice could have been given, don't bring your family to this. It might be a tough day. Or is that unfair? Like I said, even if Simmons asks his question in a more diplomatic way, it's still going to be an uncomfortable moment that maybe you don't want your family there for. That part is the thing that keeps sticking with me. As I roll through this in my head and I acknowledge that Steve Simmons is a bit of a clown show, and more than a bit, do I put it on him to go, well, his kids are here, I shouldn't ask the question I need to ask? No, I don't think I do. But I wouldn't have seen the question necessarily coming in quite the way that it did. But I think the reason I was so fine with it in the moment is that just I'm so sick of Keith Pelly and his clear deflection on, like, they clearly are not okay with being asked anything real. And both Myrtle and and CJ here over the last 24 hours have explained that, in all the reporting that they did on Pelly, to go into that big piece that kind of blew up a couple of weeks ago, that Pelly was given a chance to respond to and was written to, asked, do you want to comment? Do you want to whatever? And every time it was no thanks. And then the next time he's got a camera in his face, he goes, that's all erroneous. It's all whatever. It's not a good look, man. They are not okay with being criticized. They are not okay with being questioned. And with a hire like this, with this little experience to run a team like this, you needed to know you were going to be questioned. And he was clearly taken aback by it all. Like, he had no idea that this press conference was going to go this way. And he's off balance. And like I said, he's putting his own hand up in front of the people he just hired to go, I'll take care of this. And you're like, it's not going to work, man. This is the fucking Toronto Maple Leafs. I often think people overstate how tough it is to talk to the media in Toronto. But you do have to talk to them. And at some point, your people are going to have to talk to them. And it's going to have to be more than just the people under that Rogers umbrella. And Pelly wasn't ready for that. Like I said, I don't care for that guy. I don't really care for Steve Simmons either. And so one of them throwing a hard elbow at the other, I don't really have a problem with it. But I do cringe a little thinking about the fact that Shake's kids were in the room. So that's sort of where I'm at with that. It wasn't a great moment for anybody. But, if two jerk-offs want to go head-to-head on camera for the rest of our entertainment, I'm fine for it. Maybe just escort Shake's kids out of the room first. That's all. Anyway, that's probably enough on all of that. This, like I said, was just kind of a stream of consciousness. As is often the case, it went much longer than I thought it would. Got a lot of that off my chest before Nick Ashbourne joins us tomorrow. We'll talk Jays with him. We'll talk Leafs with him. We'll talk Stanley Cup playoffs with him. That should be a lot of fun. And then Steve Bunda on Friday morning, I believe you're going to get that one. Lots of CFL talk there, more hockey inside as well, and maybe some UFC too. So stick around. Thanks for joining me for this one, and we will catch you all next time.